Lord, I'm amazed by you. Lord, I'm amazed by you. Lord, I'm amazed by you. How you love me.
Hey, good morning. We are, I think we're on week number 5. Of Alan's sabbatical, and we're bringing up anybody who will come up and preach. So they invited me to come for today and next week. So I'm glad to be here. The concept here is talking about what are your passions, and so different staff have been talking about stuff. And this morning I'm going to talk about discipleship, and next week I'm going to talk a little bit about evangelism. And some of you are already like, oh, yeah, okay, good. Finally, I can pull out my app and I can secretly play Pokemon Go. I'm just saying, if there a Pikachu jumps up on the screen, I don't have that one yet, so raise your hand and say Pikachu's. No, just kidding. I'm not saying that. I grew up in the 80s. Did anybody else grow up in the 80s when you were like a teenager or whatever? Okay. So we had a thrilling game called the Rubik's Cube. Oh, that's right. They brought it back. We used to play a game when I was a little kid called Simon Says. Simon Says, touch your nose. Simon Says, touch your knee. And then they came out with this amazing game, and it was electronic. And anybody had this game when you were? Okay, so you know what happens, right? You turn on the on switch, and the little yellow thing goes off, and what do? You push the yellow thing, right? And then it goes yellow, red, and then you go yellow, red, and then it goes yellow, red, blue. Yellow, red, blue, and anyway, and so an algorithm or pattern comes out and all that. And if you miss it, if you hit the wrong color, it goes, eh. It makes this irritating sound that it's almost very similar to the other operation game where you hit the side, and it completes the circuit. So I had one of these games, and I got really good at it, which is really sad. So when I talk to my kids about the electronic games that we had back then, and this was cutting edge, and then they're looking, I'm like, yeah, you got to see this other game called Pong. That was amazing. And he's showing me what the PS5 or whatever it is nowadays, has, and you're just sitting back scratching your head going, wow. Or, right, Pokemon Go. It's amazing, the technology today. Somewhere along the lines of my high school years, and some of you are going to be able to relate to this, I grew up in the church. And there was something that happened in my relationship with God. I accepted Jesus at a very young age. But I got to this point where Christianity became a list of do's and don'ts. And it stopped being about, am I going to follow Jesus? Somewhere along the line, it became, if you're a Jesus follower or this game called Jesus Says, then there's some things that you would do. So on the do list would be go to church every Sunday. That was a good thing to do midweek if you had it offered. It would be when the offering plate goes by. You're supposed to put some money in there. If you're at high school, our youth pastor would say, well, Jesus says you're supposed to be nice to the people that are less popular than you. You're supposed to be nice to everybody. It's kind of a little bit of Jesus Says. And if you're not, well, you're going to get one of these in your life. Well, then there's a list of things you're not supposed to do. It was very clear in our youth group how far you could go with a girl. That's not what this sermon's about today, so I'm not going to get in trouble with that. You're not supposed to, scold or chew tobacco. You're not supposed to smoke. We weren't talking about vape back then. That's something really cool that you young hipsters have today. But back then, it was, smoking cigarettes. And if you smoke cigarettes, that was on the no list. My house, we weren't allowed to go to R-rated movies. We weren't allowed to see, definitely no nudity. And here's the thing. You can probably find Bible verses to support all this. But because I didn't really understand the why and the who, I wasn't following Jesus. It was more like, just give me that list. Can you please update the list? As adults, maybe we would say, well, there's a political party you can follow if you're a true Christian, or maybe not. Maybe there's a certain kind of people that you can listen to or people that you can hang out. And don't hang out with those people, whoever those people are. Well, here's what happened, at least to me in my later high school years. God really did some amazing things. I ended up going to Bible college right out of high school, and so God did some really neat things there. But as a youth pastor and my years of ministry, I have talked to a lot of 20-somethings, young 20-somethings or late teens. And frequently, they'll come up with a little bit of, they don't articulate it like this, but they feel like this Christianity thing is just a spiritual game of Simon Says or Jesus Says. And what happens is you go in and you experience and you start doing some sinful things and you're like, this is fun. Sin can be fun, right? And you're like, I don't get it. I don't play the game very well. And then the people who are playing the game really well, they're kind of judgmental against me. And you know what? I'm done. I'm out. And then hopefully we get them back when they decide to get married, have kids, and then they start thinking about my family and maybe my own children. I'd like them to know who the Lord is. And so then they come back to the church. But a lot of people check out, and this is part of the reason. It's a big deal. And my prayer for all of us this morning is that we would understand that Christianity, though it has some do's and don'ts, that's not the primary motivation. That isn't why Jesus came. And I've got some great news for you this morning. The reason Jesus came is a simple invitation. And what's going to really blow your mind in just a moment, we're going to find out that when we're following Jesus, we're going to end up in some places that we would maybe not want to be or didn't think this was a part of the playbook. So if you don't mind, some of us who brought our Bibles with us, you can turn to Mark chapter 1. We're going to have the scriptures up there. Don't be playing Pokemon, but some of you like me have the Bible app, okay? And again, give me some signals if there's a Pokemon up here that I should get. Just kidding. Quit talking about it. All right, Matthew chapter 1. As Jesus walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw who? Simon and his brother Andrew, and they're casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. I love that. They were fishermen. Now, what's interesting is fishing today, a lot of us think, oh, rod and reel, right? And I need to get a bass boat, hon, an Evan Rude, something nice. I mean, not too over the top, but something that will get me out on the lake. Okay, not these guys. If you had one of these nets, and there's like 4 or 5 different kinds of nets. I did some research on it. I can't get into all that this morning, but it was kind of cool that the way they did it back in the New Testament times, very similar how they still do it today. They're on the Sea of Galilee. But anyway, so these guys are out in their boats, and they're casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And Jesus walks by, and he says, "Come, follow me." I don't know how he said it. It would be really cool to hear the tone, his body language and all that. But he said, "Come follow me. And I will send you out and fish for people, or I will make you fishers of men," as the little Bible song used to say. Verse 18. So they talked about it for a while. They went home and talked to their parents and their families to see if this was indeed God's will. That's not what it says, does it? It says that once they left their nets and followed him. Now, here's the deal. If you're a fisherman, the way you put your nets away is very, very important. You could get in trouble if you don't put your nets away the right way. Talk to one of the sound guys about how you fold up cords or whatever. I mean, you get in big trouble if you don't do stuff, a certain way. There's like fold in and out. All right. Here's what they did. At once they left their nets and followed me. Now, this word follow comes from the Greek word akathuo. It means to go, to accept as authority, to seek or to attain, to engage as a way of life. It means to continually, it's active, it's present. It's something that we are not just going to do now, but we're going to continue to do. We're going to continue to follow you, Jesus. And what? We're going to build a church and make a bunch of rules. No. He said, you're going to fish for people. I love the imagery there. You are going to now follow me, and fish for people. Now, next week, I'm going to talk a little bit about what does it look like in Loudoun County and in our area today, 2016, culturally to fish for people. It's going to be fun. I've got a great video from a guy from my last church. His name is Mike, and we're going to hear his story. It's absolutely amazing. So what I want to ask this morning is, how is your fellowship? That's not a real word. Okay, well, it's a Danism. Fellowship. How is your fellowship this morning? Are you following Jesus? You see, that's a different question, isn't it? A lot of us are like, well, I'm here in church, so like, hey, ring the bell, man. I'm doing good today. I'm here in church. Okay, yeah, that's great. But there's times when we can set everything else aside and we can sit here and go, okay, Jesus, what do you want me to do now? How can I follow you to the next place? Where are you at work around me so that I can follow you there? It's a different question. A lot of us are like, well, give me that list. I like the do's and don'ts list. That's easier. I mean, it's more clear. But this whole thing about me just following you, Jesus, that's kind of can seem a little mystical and vague. But here's the deal. As you're following Jesus, he may lead you into a completely different place than he's going to lead me as I follow Jesus. And that's the plan. Verse 19, when he had gone a little further, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat, the brothers. They're preparing their nets. Verse 20, without delay, Jesus called them, and they what? Left their father Zebedee in the boat. Hey, Pops, we're out. See ya. We got invited. We're going to go follow this carpenter guy. We're out. Now, can't get all into it this morning, but it was not uncommon that rabbis would come along and pull students to go ask. It was kind of an honor and all that. And yes, this would impact the family business a little bit, but not so much because it says that he had other hired men. He left his dad in the boat with the other hired men, and he followed Jesus. You know, David Platt is an author, and he says, followers of Jesus don't always know where they are going, but they always know who they are with. What an adventure these guys were about to partake on. Absolutely awesome. Look what happens. Because Jesus is just about to start building the team. I think he's got 4 guys now. Verse 13. Once again, Jesus was out beside the lake. He hung out at the lake a lot. Anybody like to vacation at the lake? Large crowd came to Jesus, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, which we know is Matthew, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Now, let's stop there. Here's the deal. Tax collectors. You don't ask tax collectors. Tax collectors are bad people. Rome had auctioned off the right for certain individuals to go pay the taxes of the people, and if you charge them more, then you get to keep whatever. Just make sure that the Morgan household, if we owe 15% and you charge us 30%, Rome doesn't care as long as you get the money. These guys were like betraying their own countrymen, right? Tax collectors were bad people. We don't like tax collectors. You know, a lot of us think, oh, IRS agents. No. Those IRS agents are great compared to these tax collectors. These guys were just people, terrible, vile. I mean, how could you do this to your own people? James and John, Simon and Andrew, they're walking, following Jesus. Why is Jesus going near the... No. This is our team. You're not going to go and... No. What does Jesus say? He walks up to Levi, sitting at a tax collector's booth. Follow me. Jesus told him, and Levi got up and what? Followed him. Here's the thing. Following Jesus led James, John, Simon, and Andrew to go and hang out with tax collectors. I mean, it absolutely, so many of us, we think, okay, well, now that we're going to church and now that we're trying to get our lives right with God, what we need to do is set up a boundary and kick people out. We have to make sure that the bad people stay out and that the bad people don't get in, right? I mean, that's kind of our mindset. But what is Jesus doing here? He says, I'm going to actually invite a tax collector on the team. Man, following Jesus, that just doesn't make sense. Verse 15, while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, now we're eating with those people? Hey, listen, I know there's probably nobody in here who's racist. That all happens outside the church. Wink, wink. I'm just saying, guys, if you follow in Jesus, I think we're going to hang around with some people that we feel uncomfortable with. I think if we're really going to get serious, and these guys haven't followed Jesus for very long, and all of a sudden now, I mean, are you going to hang out with prostitutes next? That's for another day. The love that Jesus had. The way Jesus sees people is not the way we see them. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. Oh, wow. So I'm going to follow you, Jesus, and you're going to lead me to rub shoulders with people that mama may not like. We need to hear this. We need to embrace this today. Maybe the church, we could launch an initiative and go where, I don't know, people in mental health area. Oh, wait a minute. Doug Wall did that. Doug Wall, sitting in his office, dude, you just do music. Don't come out here and get a heart for like people in our community with mental health issues. Don't do that. I'm joking. You see, following Jesus, of course, Doug loves to do music, but following Jesus led him to start another initiative. Wow, that's pretty cool. We have people here with so many talents and abilities. Following Jesus may actually lead you into dealing with sex trafficking in the Loudoun and Fairfax area. Maybe Interfaith Relief needs some help. Tree of Life needs some help. There might be some students who need tutoring. You know, the bad schools in our area. I don't know what those are, but maybe you do. Who knows what would happen if we actually just let Jesus lead us? You see, and here's what I wrestled with. Following Jesus was just a list of do's and don'ts. But according to the scriptures, following Jesus is about letting him lead your life to relationally impact and rub shoulders with others. Is that exciting? You ask any one of these disciples, by the way, they're like, man, life following Jesus is not boring. I cannot believe we're sitting here. I mean, can you imagine? We're sitting here with a bunch of tax collectors. Oh, man, this is not what I thought we signed up for. Again, you put your own little group of who your family or friends or other people would think, never be sitting down to lunch with those people. Well, this is the first time disciples is used here in Mark. It's the Greek word mathetes. It's a disciple. It's translated someone who follows another person or another way of life, who submits himself to the discipline or teaching of that leader. So it's submission. It's yielding. It's, hey, you have the right of way. Rabbi, lead us. Where do you want us to go? I mean, this was a little thing, but I had a friend on Facebook out in the California area where I grew up, and he bought a bunch of Starbucks cards, and after the shooting down in Dallas, he felt like he had to do something. And so he bought a bunch of Starbucks cards, and when he interacted with police officers, or he was just handing them, he's just saying, hey, I don't know, man, I just want you to know that I'm care for you guys, and I'm praying, It's like, well, I mean, that's something. There was a church down in the Atlanta area last week they had a panel. The senior pastor sat here, and he had two African-American guys, and they had, and then they also had some, and they were talking about race relations with police officers and the whole thing. Amazing. And I'll never forget, the senior pastor, Andy Stanley, he looks over at the other guys. He goes, hey, can I just tell you what my kids, when I taught them how to drive, what they're supposed to do? He said, I just told them just stay out of traffic. Pull over to the right and stay out of traffic. And the other guys were like, yeah, that's not what our folks told us to do if we get pulled over by a police officer. Here's my point. Following Jesus will lead you to do stuff, hopefully out front. There may or may not be people being critical about that down in their area. I don't know. But it goes back to one of Andy Stanley's quotes. He said, are you a disciple of Jesus or are you just a Christian? Are you a disciple or are you a Christian? Because if you're a disciple, that means you're following. How's your fellowship this morning? How is your fellowship? All right, so disciples, they are followers, trying to make that case this morning. So what is this thing called discipleship that you turn your brain off because like, oh, that's a church word, right? The key to discipleship is fellowship. Am I following you, Jesus? Christian discipleship is the process to become more like Jesus. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 3, and the Lord who is the Spirit, he makes us more and more like Jesus as we are changed into his glorious image. There is a time as we follow him that it's not just the stuff outwardly that we go do and minister to others, but there is some times where he says, hey, you know what? I may or may not have something bigger for you or another mission for you. I have to deal with some area in your life. For instance, and so I got to chip something out of your life. Francis Chan says it this way. You'll find that the things that you let go of while following Jesus were the very things that were going to destroy you in the end anyway. I like that. God is working in you, Paul said in Philippians 2, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. Amen. So what's our goal in life? What's our purpose in life? Why are we here? Great question. The reason is to become more like Jesus, and he's going to lead us in areas that talk about our thoughts and our words and our actions, and it's got to line up with the scriptures. And so that's why we talk about the scriptures all the time at LCC. That's why we want people to get involved in life groups. That's why we want people to serve. That's why we want to teach our children all about the Lord using our guidebook, our love letter from God, the Holy Bible. If you want to gain in your passion for discipleship, I have 5 quick characteristics, and I got to run through these quickly, and they are relational. It's so interesting. So often that if we feel like we want to get closer to Jesus, it means I need to get away from people. And yet Jesus is like, no, actually, following me is very relational. And it's going to start with God. The first one is Jesus loved God. So therefore, growing, passionate disciples also going to love God. Mark 12, you need to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and your strength, Jesus said. We could do a 12-week series on that. Maybe every Sunday is about loving God, but I'm going to move on to number 2 because I want to make sure we have enough time. Number 2 is that Jesus demonstrated love for other followers, other church folk. It's interesting, the amount of years I've been in church ministry, that oftentimes people will approach me and they're like, I just don't like the so-and-sos. They come to the church, and I don't like them. We don't get along well. Our personalities, it's oil and water. Yeah, I've been a leader in church world for a long time. I could probably give you lots of stories, but guess what? A new command I give you, Jesus said, love one another. As I've loved you, so you must love one another. By this, talking about loving one another, everyone will know that you're my disciples as you love one another. Ouch. Well, if he was just being a little vague there, he's not making it very clear. Listen, we have to love one another. Even the knuckleheads that you serve in ministry with. We must love one another. This goes into our family members. We must love our spouses. We must love our kids, love our families. If you've gone on vacation or had a family reunion, you get to see people you haven't seen in a long time, you're like, oh, yeah, I got to love you too. Haven't seen you in a while. Better love you too. I love you with the love of the Lord. Be blessed. Do others know? Do they sense? Do they see your love for them? It's a simple question. You know, I have a 16-year-old and a daughter who's going on 40, you know, and do they know that I love them? And that's a question between me and them and me and God. But do they know that I love them? Does my wife know that I love her? That's a thing between me and God and me and her, but that's an opportunity to follow Jesus even in those areas. I love what Andy Stanley said. He goes, the more conscious I am of the work God has yet to do in me, the less critical I am of you and what God has to do in you. You see, oftentimes we kind of look in each other's backyards, don't we? And we're like, man, that's a mess back there. They're like, yeah, okay, turn around, bud. Look in your own backyard for a little bit. You know, but it's so often we just compare ourselves to each other. Forget all that. Let's love one another. Paul says in Philippians 2, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Don't look for your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Have that mindset, as Jesus Christ does, in your relationships with one another. I love that. Here, the question is, will you love the other followers here at LCC? Your work, your family. You can see here how Jesus is following him. It's very relational. We love God. We love the other believers. Now we love our enemies. And I'll be honest with you, with all the terrorism and stuff, this is a very difficult verse. But there were terroristic type things that were happening in the New Testament as well. At the time when Jesus said these words, and we have to wrestle with this. Jesus said, you have heard that the law says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your what? Enemies? And pray for who? Those who persecute you. Wow. No, this is vengeance, man. You knock horns with the bull, you're going to, well, no, Jesus, it's not being weak. It's actually an amazing amount of constraint to say, you know what, I will not give vengeance back to you. But what does it mean to love, Mother Teresa said, following Jesus is simple, it's not easy. Love until it hurts, and then love some more. Or St. Paul, he says, love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud, it doesn't dishonor others, not self-seeking, not easily angered, keeps no record of wrongs. Love doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Okay. Well, that's a pretty good working definition of love that you and I can begin to experience. And maybe there's a neighbor, maybe there's somebody locally, maybe it's a boss, an employee that's persecuting you. I don't know your story, but this would be a great approach as we're following Jesus. He may be allowing this very painful thing to go on in your life so that you can love and demonstrate your fellowship in this area. I know, it's not what you wanted to hear, but I think it's biblical. Jesus calls us to love those that are not believers as well. I call them outsiders, not in any bad way. It's Jesus came to seek and to save those who are lost. Boy, do we forget that. Not only did Jesus come and pulls those disciples, what's one of the first things they end up doing? Hanging around with a bunch of sinners and lost people. I love that. How cool is that? He said, I have come not to call those who think they're righteous, but those who know they are sinners. He says in Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey. Now, I'm going to go into how we can connect and kind of fish for outsiders next week. So make sure you come back and set your alarms nice and early and be here for that. And we've got a great video. Can't wait for you to see that as well. But how do we do this? How do I love difficult believers? How do I love the enemies? How do I love those who are not Christians? How do I do that, Dan? I get it. Okay, I'm in. I'm sold. You got me. How do I do that? Because It's really, really difficult, and I know that. God knows that. And so he has empowered us with the Holy Spirit, and here's what he tells us to do. Jesus said it this way in John 15, I am the vine, you are the branches. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. Apart from me, you can do nothing. At the end of the day, when you are at your wit's end, am I plugged in? Am I plugged into the power source? Am I plugged in? Am I connected to the vine? My wife and I, we don't argue, but I usually do the pruning of certain trees in our yard and don't tell her and then see if she finds out, because I tend to anybody else over prune, overcut? And then your spouse gets, what are you doing, right? So I tend to do that, and so it's kind of a little running joke, ha ha ha, dear, in our house. But here's the thing: when I prune something and you cut it off, and I hold it right next, it looks identical. Nothing on this branch has changed that I just cut off, except for it's completely dead. You can't replant it. You can't tape it back on there. It's gone. It's dead. It looks good. You guys, how many of us do that at church? Man, you look good. You look Christian today. Yeah, not a whole lot of life going on the inside. It's like, I know that. I've lived that before. I know what that feels like. Jesus says, if you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that's thrown away and withers. Verse 7, but if you remain in me, and this is the key, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it'll be done for you. This too is for my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit. What? Showing yourselves to be my mathetes, my disciples, my followers. This word remain means to live, to continue in. God will produce the fruit. Your job is to stay connected to the vine. But here, let me tell you why you won't do it. Here's why you won't follow Jesus, and here's the same reason why I don't. Because it's really hard. It is really hard. Jesus said it this way in Luke chapter 9. He said to all of them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. Oh, man. Really? Because I've lived a lot of years trying to boost up myself. Well, Jesus says, deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow me. The cross in the first century, it was the most painful and humiliating thing. So what Jesus was saying was, in order to follow me, you've got to kind of nail up all of your stuff that your desires, so to speak, your entertainment, your self, because you can't follow two voices. You know, my wife and I, we went on a road trip, and we have Siri going. And Siri says, turn left in 3 miles. My wife's like, no, I think you should turn right. Okay, at some point, I got to make a decision. Am I going to listen to my wife, or am I going to listen to Siri? Or, you know, illustration could go the other way. Is she going to listen to me, or is she going to listen to Siri? Bottom line, you can't follow both, right? You got to pick one. That's the thing. There's so much stuff in life that's calling us, go this way, go this way. And what do you want to do? It's like, oh, I got to stop and I got to follow you, Jesus. Kyle Idleman, in his book, Not a Fan, he says, following Jesus isn't about trying every day, it's about dying every day. And the consideration here is following Jesus will eventually lead you to a crisis of belief. It's at that moment when your motivation is stripped of everything except faithful obedience. Now, here at LCC, God has called us to train and equip pastors, train and equip believers. As a church, our job is to develop and help mature and grow disciples. We do that through our growth tracks. If you haven't gotten connected in one of our growth tracks this month, that's good because we didn't offer them. So, but it's our little like model that we've sort of adopted. And so make sure that you get connected there. There's other people and the stories that we're hearing about people growing, the enjoyment they're having, the fulfillment of getting connected in small groups. We're not supposed to do this thing alone. It's relational. If you haven't heard anything else, it's relational.
Lord, I'm amazed